In the late 1940s, German prisoners rebuilt parts of Wrocław. One of those buildings stood in my district, and something inside the basement was never meant to be uncovered.
At that time, I was living in an old post-war building. The house had been built in the late 1940s, shortly after the war, purportedly by German prisoners forced to rebuild the city. It stood in one of the older districts, not far from the pre-war German blocks. Back then, people still occasionally called this part of the city Breslau. Small, only 2 entrances and 3 floors, it had been solidly constructed, and if it hadn't been for the negligence of the municipal utility services, it would probably still be in excellent condition. There was also a basement in our building, quite luxurious by external standards. Each of the 18 apartments had its own separate storage room down there. It is about this basement that the story will go on. Our basement was notable for the fact that it periodically turned into a swamp, an impassable bog that emitted such smells that it was nauseating to even walk past it, let alone go inside. From time to time, the maintenance workers would supposedly fix something, and the smells would disappear for a while. Although, if you asked any of the residents, no one had ever actually seen these maintenance workers. Yet the work somehow got done. The second peculiarity of our basement was that it had 19 rooms, not counting the corridor. For some unknown reason, the German builders had constructed 1 extra room, thereby taking space away from the 2 neighboring storage units. The door to this extra room was solid, a thick iron door 2 fingers wide, eaten away at by rust in places. It was never locked. It constantly trembled on its hinges and slammed loudly against the walls, making everyone flinch. It was difficult to explain such behavior. Where in an isolated room could such a powerful draft come from, one strong enough to move such a massive door as if it were made of thin plywood? More than once, neighbors had tried to go and find out where that draft was coming from, but their enthusiasm melted away every time someone approached the door. Perhaps it was the smell. From the 19th room came a particularly disgusting odor. Apparently, repairing the sewage in that room was not part of the local building administration's responsibilities. Or perhaps it was the door itself, which no one wanted to touch. And it wasn't just a door. At the corners and in the center were large circular rivets, painted white. The paint should have worn off over time, yet it looked as though someone kept refreshing it.
There was another reason people did not want to investigate: an oppressive sense of danger. Fear swallowed a person whole when they took even a couple of steps past the 19th room. The fear that if you took a few more steps, the door would slam shut behind you with a dull thud and would never open again. So we lived, always passing that damned room on the opposite side of the corridor. We had a regular drunk in our building. Everyone called him Uncle Merrick. He was actually a kind-hearted man, the type who, when drunk, is seized by an uncontrollable urge to do something useful. During one such soulful impulse, Uncle Merrick decided to hang a large barn lock on that door, just to be safe. He even managed to find welding equipment somewhere to weld massive hinges onto it. To his credit, he completed the task perfectly. True, as it later turned out, he didn't actually have a key to the lock. But we turned a blind eye to that. After all, no one wanted anything coming out of there. The tenants breathed a noticeable sigh of relief. Now it was possible to go down into the basement without fear. Which I did one winter Friday evening, wishing to treat myself to a jar of pickled tomatoes I had stored. I opened the basement door and began descending the stairs, having first turned on the light in the corridor. Once downstairs, I noticed that the light bulb had started flickering, threatening to leave me in total darkness within minutes. I shivered and decided to hurry. As I passed the 19th door, I heard, somewhere in the distance, clearly outside the house, some strange sounds, as if someone were dragging something very heavy across the floor. After a few moments, the sounds stopped, and I didn't pay much attention to them at the time. I continued to my storage room. I unlocked it and began sorting through jars, trying to find at least one with tomatoes. I became so absorbed in the task that I slipped out of reality for a few minutes, only snapping back when I still hadn't found any tomatoes and decided to take cucumbers instead. Turning around, already prepared to step back into the common corridor, I froze. I heard a rustling. No, not a rustling. They were faint, dull thuds, heavy ones, as if someone had suddenly encountered an obstacle that had never been there before and was now figuring out how best to remove it.
I stood there, clutching the jar of cucumbers, afraid to move. And I was absolutely certain the sound was coming from that very 19th room. Several minutes passed, though to me they felt like hours. The sounds grew louder. The blows from the other side became more furious and impatient. I cursed myself for my hesitation. I should have run the moment I heard the first blow. Run out of that cursed basement. That burial ground where the Germans had entombed something that now wanted to break free. And evidently not for the first time. A scraping joined the pounding. Something in impotent rage clawed at the iron door. If only the door would hold. If only that drunk had done everything properly. That thought completely paralyzed my mind, because if the creature got free, it would surely guess from the light being on that someone was in the basement. Suddenly, the sound stopped. Had the creature understood that the obstacle was insurmountable, or had it simply decided to rest? I realized I would not get a second chance. As quietly as possible, I set the jar back on the shelf and prepared to live through the worst moments of my life. I stepped softly into the corridor and gently closed the door behind me. I turned toward the exit. My storage room was at the very far end of the underground floor. To get upstairs, I had to walk about 5 meters down the corridor, turn right, walk another 20 meters, reach the vestibule, and climb the stairs. It was precisely along that second 20-meter stretch that the cursed 19th room was located. The light was very dim. Several bulbs had already burned out. Others were barely glowing, threatening to go dark at any second. I tiptoed through the first 5 meters and stopped, gathering my courage. Should I run those 20 meters, making as much noise as necessary, or try to move carefully along the wall, producing the least sound possible? I chose the second option, at least until there was obvious danger. The first few meters I walked fairly confidently, and even allowed myself to pick up the pace slightly. About 3 meters remained to the 19th door when I heard a new sound. After that, my knees began to tremble, and I slid down to the wall to the floor so as not to fall. I sat there for a few seconds. Then, ignoring everything, I lunged forward with all my strength, dashed past the damned door, flew up the stairs, rushed into my apartment, grabbed my phone, and left to spend the night at a friend's place. Now, when I analyze that incident, it is hard to say what frightened me more: the sound of earth being torn apart, mixed with the knocking against concrete, or the way something abruptly forced its way into the narrow gap beneath the door. I never saw what it was in full, only the tip of something dark and slick, jerking blindly against the floor as if searching for purchase. It moved with a violent, uncontrolled twitching, scraping and striking the concrete, before withdrawing just as suddenly as it had appeared. Several years passed. In our district, they decided to build new apartment complexes. After all, it was practically the city center. Our building was scheduled for demolition. The residents were relocated. However, according to regulations, before demolition, it was necessary to inspect absolutely every room in the house, including the basement. There was no avoiding it. As they later recounted, a group of 5 strong men hesitated for a long time before breaking the lock off the 19th storage room. They said there was no point in going in. Obviously, there was nothing there, but threats from their superiors forced 2 of them to enter. As if from the disgusting smell, a mixture of sewage waste, some kind of rags and rot, they found nothing. Nothing except for a strange tunnel in the wall, from which a draft blew, carrying the scent of a grave. The tunnel slanted downward, so it was decided to fill it with a special mixture and forget about it, writing it off as a remnant of some forgotten German wartime construction made by the architects of the building.